It's 1951, and there's a skinny paperback about a kid wandering New York, and it gets banned, it gets blamed, it gets worshipped all at once. And so we're here to ask, why did The Catcher in the Rye shake America so hard? Well, I'm Matt Hasquin. I'm a high school history teacher, and I'm taking you through Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire, line by line, topic by topic. So let's go ahead and set the stage here and talk about The Catcher in the Rye. So it's post World War II America. You know, there's booming suburbs, there's good manners, there's conformity in the early Cold War. J.D. Salinger was the author, and he was fresh from the trauma of war, and he publishes a novel that sounds like an actual teenager talking back, and it becomes a bestseller and kind of a lightning rod. So let's look at the story here. So let's meet Holden Caulfield, right? He's 16. He's recently kicked out of yet another prep school. He bolts to New York City, and he spends a chaotic 2 days chasing connection and also dodging adulthood. He calls people phonies, but he's really grieving. He's grieving his kid brother, Allie, who died of leukemia, and that wound just never healed. He tries identities on like jackets, like the cool guy in a nightclub, the romantic on a date, the tough kid in a fight, and none of them fit. He chats with nuns over breakfast, and he feels genuinely moved. He takes his little sister Phoebe to the carousel, and finally stops pretending to be above everything. The title? Well, Holden mishears a Robert Burns line and imagines himself as a catcher in a rye field, saving kids from falling off of a cliff, catching them before they tumble into the messy compromises of adulthood. It's naive and it's beautiful, but it's also heartbreaking, and that's the point. So what made it radical? Well, first of all, if you look at the voice of the work, you know, there's a first-person, slangy, unreliable narrator who sounds like your most brutally honest student. It's in 1951. Well, that felt like someone opened a window in a stuffy room, right? When it comes to the language in it and the honesty in it, the book used profanity and sexual candidness and raw talk about depression. It wasn't written to shock, it was written to sound true. There's also like an alienation to it. Holden's phonies rant isn't just like teen angst. It's a diagnosis of post-war America's pressure to perform normalcy, right? There's an aspect of grief and mental health here, because under all the sarcasm in the work, there is trauma. Holden's spiraling isn't cute. He is in pain. And for many readers, that honesty felt like, you know, being seen. So what led the book to be, you know, banned at times? Almost immediately, schools and libraries challenged the work for profanity and sexual references, blasphemy, and a bad attitude. Yet there were teachers that argued the opposite, that it was a mirror that helped students confront grief and hypocrisy and growing up. You know, the fight over Catcher isn't about swear words. It's about who gets to define what good literature looks like for young people, and whether or not, you know, discomfort has educational value. Yes, you know, some famous criminals owned or referenced the book, and that doesn't mean, you know, a novel causes violence. You know, more importantly, Holden isn't a role model, a model to imitate. He's more of a case study in pain and loneliness and longing for meaning. The book asks you to empathize and to question, not to cosplay his worst decisions. Catcher helped unlock a lineage. If you look at S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders or John Green's novels, you know, like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, all owe a debt to Salinger's honesty about adolescence. And Salinger's own follow-ups, Franny and Zoe, the Glass family stories, They kept exploring spiritual hunger beneath, like, shiny surfaces. When you look at the work itself, some things happen to come up, and these would be like scholable stuff for my kids, but like, the ducks in Central Park, where do they go in the winter? And it's a simple question that's really about what happens to me when things change. When you look at Phoebe and the carousel, why does Holden finally feel okay in that moment? What's Salinger saying about innocence versus acceptance? And the theme of phonies, right? So when is Holden right about hypocrisy? And when is like phony a shield to avoid vulnerability? And then if you look at the grief in the work, how does Allie's death shape every choice that Holden makes? What would support look like for him today? So why does it matter, right? We're back to my question that I always ask. The Catcher in the Rye is a cultural, it's like a seismograph. It recorded the tremors under America's polished 1950s surface, conformity, loneliness, and the cost of pretending. It helped create the modern teen voice in literature, and it keeps fueling debates about censorship and mental health and what school is for. Is it comfort or is it growth? So when Billy Joel sings Brando, the King and I, and the Catcher in the Rye, he's mapping 1951's mood, celebrity cool, Broadway polish, and a kid who refuses to play along. And that tension is the decade. So if you're reading along with the song, drop your favorite catcher line here, or ask a question that you'd like to ask Holden, right? Follow for the next stop on Billy Joel's timeline, because next up we'll be talking about President Eisenhower. Thanks for watching.